Good evening, everybody. We are back on the Football Diehards DFS show for Week 5. We had to take it off last week because our schedules didn't match up, but we're back and better for you after this. We got a 10-game slate for Week 5 with why do we have 10 game slate? Oh, there's buys. That's right. The buys have hit, and we got another London game, so we've got a little more of a condensed slate, so we're going to break it down for you as much as we possibly can. My name is Jamie Calando. You can find me on Twitter at JAC3600. And joined, as always, is my wonderful co-host, Eric Romoff at Fantasy Nav, NAV. Eric, I had a bad decision that kind of cost me, maybe that was the week before. They're already starting to mesh together. I'm trying to think what last week was. But how did you do in week 4 for DFS last week?
I did not have my best week last week. I am also struggling to recall my downfall. There was some. Well, I mean, the overarching theme is that my chalky plays hit and plays missed, right? So anytime you're doing that in a tournament, you're usually in for a long day in the office, right? Like I had a fair amount of Christian McCaffrey. I actually had the Fields Kmet stack, but in that game I also had Javonte Williams, right? So like just near misses all around for me.
Yeah, now I remember the slate too. I was thinking this was the week where like it was down to the Jets versus the Bills defense, but that was 2 weeks ago where the wrong defense kind of cost me a win. Yet last week was the one where I tinkered myself right out of a win. Like I had the winning lineup all week, and then because I remember I had Justin Fields kind of locked in as my cash quarterback all week, and then when those cheap guys, the Aiden O'Connell and who was the other one?
DTR last week
for Cleveland. Yeah. You know, they allowed me to get so much stuff in. So my cash pool condensed with those cheap guys, and I wound up going with DTR, and that and Pollard was the reason that I got up. It was basically like I went Field Swift to DTR Pollard, and it wound up being such a drop off that I wasn't able to overcome some of the hits I had, like McCaffrey. But well, you know, you live and learn with that kind of thing. We can not talk our way out of the winning lineups this week. We're going to take you through the 10-game slate position by position. Thank you again for joining us here. We're live on YouTube right now. I see Toronto Dave, one of our favorites, has joined us in the chat. Welcome, Dave. Thank you always. We love you. If you have any questions, DFS or season long, feel free to put it in there, and we'll kind of get to them in between positions. And we'll make sure we touch on cash and GPP and everything else that your DFS hearts desire. So you ready to get down to it, Eric?
Yeah, let's jump in.
All right, so starting at the quarterback position, this is you updated our Football Diehards rostership projections right as before we went on the air here to see kind of what was standing out. And right now, it's looking as though the field is paying up at quarterback. We have Patrick Mahomes at 8,200, Jalen Hurts at 8,000. The two of them right now are coming in as the two highest rostered quarterbacks. That's a tough sell for me, at least on DraftKings this week, with such dynamic pricing, with so many top wide receivers in such good spots that you want to spend there. Plus, I love Bijan Robinson and Travis Kelce on this slate too. So it's kind of hard to pay up for quarterback for me this week. Where are you landing on those two guys? Do you have a preference of the two? Do you think they're worth it? In all formats, cash in particular. What do you think here?
Yeah, you know, the more that I tinker with my builds, the more that I find myself paying up for quarterback, right? I think what it really boils down to is, you know, the mid tier. There aren't a ton of guys that jump off the page, and you know, down in the low tier, you know, there aren't those min price kind of guys that are going to open up a ton of pay up options elsewhere in your build. So the more that I started to put together shells, the more I find myself with one of these top kind of 5 or 6 guys, right? So Mahomes and Hurts are perfectly fine, right? Like in the tournament context, even a chalky quarterback, you're still talking about a guy that's going to be like 11 or 10% rostered, right? So you're not having to navigate too much chalk in rostering these two guys, and obviously both of these game scripts are beautiful, right? These are two of the highest scoring games on the entire slate. These are two offenses by different ways that do a lot of scoring through their quarterback, right? So definitely very safe options, but also candidates to lead the slate in scoring this week.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. And, this for me is a tale of two builds right now. I put together my kind of, first run at the FanDuel cash lineup, and it just came together so easily. Just because pricing is so less dynamic over there, and Hertz is actually underpriced on that site, so that was an easy fit there. But it's hard, I want to get up to them too, especially since it looks like the rostership is going that way. Um, as of right now, the guy I have in is Tua Tagovailoa. Um, I don't. I'm curious on your thoughts on him. I mean, that entire Dolphins offense is going to be a weekly play, no matter who they're facing. And as an incredibly disgruntled Giants fan, who I don't know what I'm going to see in that game, but I mean, they're last in pressure rate, and they are 31st in sacks, despite the fact that they're blitzing at the third highest frequency in the league. That's a troubling sign for me. That I don't know. I don't know where the disconnect is there. If it's the players just aren't getting it done, or the scheme just isn't. He's getting out coached there. But for lack of a better idea here, I mean, it looks like the entire Dolphins offense is good to go in this one. What do you think of Tua? He's the one I have in my placeholder right now in cash, and they do miss their linemen. They're down linemen. It looks like Terran Armstead's not going to be in this game unless you've seen anything differently here. But what do you think of Tua?
Yeah, so on my projections, I actually see Tua as the most popular quarterback, sitting again around 11%, right? So there's a pretty clear cutoff after those three, and I think he's perfectly fine, right? Like the 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 argument against him is that Miami gets up big and switches to more of a ground game type of game plan. We saw that a few weeks ago against Denver, and he was still QB2 in that week, right? He scored 28 points. So, for me, that kind of blowout game script, it would still limit his upside, but not to the point where he's off the radar for cash or for tournament, right? The thing that would maybe make me, kind of come in underweight is just, rostering the most popular quarterback is usually something that I try to steer clear from. But, on merit alone, he's a perfectly fine play, right?
Yeah, and you mentioned the running game, and I have thoughts about that one that we're going to get to as well. I want to dig deep into that one because I'm making some enemies already as it is too. So I've been looking forward all day to talk to you about the Miami running game today. But yeah, that's the top one there. Anything else you want to mention up top before we move to the middle?
Yeah, look, I find myself really like Lamar Jackson this week, right? Like we don't have to go really all that far back. Pretty much every game this year, certainly last week against Houston, to see his opponent this week, the Steelers, just giving up plays in bunches to the quarterback position. Obviously, we've seen over the last few weeks Lamar really get things going with his legs, and if nothing else, like he's going to be in the bottom kind of third in terms of rostership, but has in my projections equally as good a chance to lead the slate in scoring, right? So we'll see how these rostership projections refresh when the morning comes. But I mean, if he's going to be, 1/3 the rostership of these top three guys and carry arguably as much, if not more, upside, I might try to find a way to get him into my tournament builds.
Yeah, I like that too, and it definitely looks like he's skating past the other three who are showing way higher rostership. So a step down from that into the mid tier. I'm assuming you like Anthony Richardson as much as I do this week. We do have Jonathan Taylor returning. I don't know what that does to him. I don't think it is that huge a deal. But the ceiling on him is matched by pretty much no one here, or he matches anybody with it at least. He's got 2 top 4 finishes so far. He looks a lot more polished than I thought he was going to be. But I mean, the thing with him is the floor, the rushing floor that he brings too. They're not afraid to let him run. So I'm good on Jonathan Taylor in cash and GPP. What do you think on him?
Yeah, I mean, look, Anthony Richardson has been an absolute delight through his young NFL career, right? There have been times where it hasn't been great. As recently as last week, he only completed 44% of passes, but he did plenty on the ground, and he finished with almost 30 fantasy points, right? Yeah. So this is exactly what you're looking for when you roster him. I'm kind of curious to see from you. I see Anthony Richardson as like a sub 5% rostership. If that's the case, like I'm going to be way overweight on that figure, right? Because the floor is certainly there. We'll talk about it later, but there are stacking options that I really like. So if we're talking anything, probably sub 8% even. I'm gonna have more than my fair share of Anthony Richardson tomorrow.
Yeah, I agree completely. And you mentioned the stacking too. This game has a 43 over under. I think it's way too low in this game. I think the Titans' run defense aside, there's no resistance on either side, and these are solid offenses that are solidly coached. On the other side, Tennessee's getting back key offensive linemen. I know they're still missing Treylon Burks, but they still got Derrick Henry. They still got DeAndre Hopkins. I think this game has shootout potential. And like you said, even completing under 50% of passes, he still was approaching his ceiling. So yeah, as long as his rostership doesn't climb up to an uncomfortable level, which it's not right now, I'm definitely in on him for GPPs. So I agree with you fully there. Moving down the list, you mentioned a good reason to pay up at quarterback, because there's not really a whole lot that stands out in this one so far. A couple on the low end of the mid tier that I'm looking at, and it's hard to do so after what we saw. But if we're to kind of believe that the Giants Dolphins game has shootout potential as well, with a game total that's right around 50, Daniel Jones at 5,800 is definitely viable. He's still missing a ton of offensive linemen again, and Saquon Barkley, we don't know, but I'm betting it's a sit again. He was sacked 10 times against Seattle. He's hit 14 times. That offensive line looked terrible. I think the Miami defense is one to play here, but if they're able to to coach it so where he's not under heavy fire, he has as much rushing upside as any of the running quarterbacks as well. So I think he's fine at 5,800. Going a little cheaper, you mentioned the Rams Eagles. I think Matthew Stafford's good, especially since he's getting Cooper Kupp back. I think he is more of a cash play than a GPP play, just because if you're stacking that game, the receivers are all so expensive on both sides that it really makes it tough to build an adequate lineup around it unless you're taking some deep shots in the dark. So those are the two that I'm kind of looking at in this mid tier the most. Who you got in this kind of 5,600 to 7,000 range?
I'm over here grinning like an idiot because I have an absolutely degenerate, dirty deep shot play that I want to take in this game that we'll talk about later. About Richardson, I like Jones as well, right? It's kind of an interesting counterpunch, right? After, unfortunately for you, your Giants got mollywopped on national television last time out. I don't think you're going to see anyone going that direction, but at least entering this week before the Thursday night game, Daniel Jones was 4th in design runs, so you like his ability to get things done on the ground. There's also a very cheap, very viable stacking partner to go along with him, and it's again an interesting way to get into this game. So, those would be the major priorities. Kirk Cousins is kind of interesting. He's in the highest game total on the slate, right? So with most of that rostership going the direction of Patrick Mahomes, you can get someone in an equally beneficial, arguably more beneficial game environment because they presume to be trailing. But he's laid a couple eggs against inferior defenses, and this Kansas City defense has been playing pretty well. So it would strictly be for the the sake of being contrarian. But if nothing else, he'll be in the player pool. Jared Goff, obviously it hurts that we're not going to have Amon-Ra St. Brown. We'll get whatever installment in the offense features Jameson Williams back tomorrow. But if for me, I like this game in particular against Carolina to go over their 44-point total. Nobody's going to be on Goff. Obviously, that offensive line is still going to give him plenty of time to operate back there. And this could be one of those kind of sneaky shootout games that you're sitting on a 1% quarterback that finishes top 5, top 7. So I'll mix him in here or there, but kind of like we said off the top, like nothing super intriguing in this tier past Anthony Richardson for me.
Yeah, I think that's where I am too. So if we move to the cheap end, and we can kind of segue here because we have a question in the chat, a DFS question in the chat from J.K. Mills. So thank you for this. He said thoughts on Zach Wilson in DFS. So Zach Wilson is 4,900. I don't know about you. Actually, I do know about you since we kind of talked about this earlier. But I'm in for sure on Zach Wilson. Why don't you talk about Wilson for as a DFS play? I have jet stacks already built with Wilson. So what do you got going on with him?
Yeah, for me, he's more in the player pool, right? Like he's not a major priority for me, but this price tag is flatly too cheap, right? Sub 5K for a guy that is going to start in general is usually underpriced, and by his standards, he's coming off an all timer last week, right? 72% completion rate, 245 and 2. Had that Jets team right on the cusp of winning that game again against a very stout Chiefs defense. So a lot of things seem to be swinging in his direction. It's kind of weird. This Zach Wilson version of the Jets offense initially was just run every single play, and last week they were like, all right, we'll just do the opposite and let him throw. He threw the ball 39 times in that game last week, even though it was very competitive, right? So if we see more of that coming up against this Denver side, I mean, giddy up, right? Like Vance Joseph is the prince that was promised for fantasy football, right? Anytime that he is running a defense, good things happen on the other side of the ball, right? Detroit in particular has allowed more yards after catch than like 10 teams have allowed passing yards in total, right? So, this sets up as a game where Zach Wilson, Denver, yes. This sets up as a game where Zach Wilson can continue his kind of short to mid-range passing game, get the ball into his playmakers' hands, and just let them do a bunch of damage after catch. So all of this bundled up in a $4,900 package is certainly appealing.
Yeah, and I like it too because we've got Breece Hall, who I love this week, rapidly gaining in rostership with the talk that the training wheels are off. And against Denver's rush defense, it's understandable why people are going to flock to a 5,400 Breece Hall. I think this gets some leverage on him too. I think he's still okay in jet stacks, but Zach Wilson, Garrett Wilson stack is a great way to kind of get access to attacking that same defense with a less rostered way. Anyone else on the low end of quarterback before we take a question and move on to running backs?
I mean, no one that's really a priority, right? Kind of like we talked about off the top. As we talk through these players, the more I examine, the more I'm convinced that I'm going to be paying up at the position this week.
Yeah. I'll throw a mention to Josh Dobbs here, just how he's been. I mean, he's been surprisingly good,
good for him.
And Cincinnati's defense has been soft, and he's super cheap at 5,200 as well. I think earlier in the week, if you asked me if he was a cash play, I would have said definitely. The way the rostership is going right now, I'd say that's a little bit dangerous with opportunity cost at the position now. But if you show me this wonderful lineup surrounding him, I wouldn't say no to it. All right, so that's the quarterbacks. We have a question here before we move on to running backs from Older Budweiser, and it deals with quarterbacks. So, hello, gentlemen. With Herbert on a bye, I currently have Dak starting. Daniel Jones, Dobbs, and Stafford are available. Do I drop Dak for one of these guys? What's your thoughts on that one?
I I probably would, honestly. This is the only scenario, the only week, presuming health for the duration, where you're considering starting Dak over Justin Herbert. So once his bye is behind him, you no longer really need Dak Prescott on your roster. And for me, I would fire up both Matt Stafford and Daniel Jones over Dak Prescott this week. I've actually got Stafford ahead of Jones by one spot, so that would be the tiebreaker. But they're all right there in that kind of back end QB1 range, where I have Dak closer to QB16.
I am looking at my own Fantasy Pros rankings right now. I actually even have Dobbs one spot ahead of Dak this week, with a much better matchup. So yeah, I'm in agreement with you, and I too have Jones one spot ahead of Stafford. But that's a coin flip for me too. I mean, I think Stafford's probably a little safer, based on what we saw from the Giants' offensive line, but Jones definitely has a much, much bigger ceiling. So that's kind of a floor versus ceiling question for you, I think, if you're, a preference with that, where you choose there. All right, so thank you for that question. Moving on to the running back position. So this is an interesting slate at running back because we don't have the high-end guys here to deal with. So, I mean, assuming Saquon Barkley doesn't play, Bijan Robinson is the highest priced option. I love him this week. I am going to be almost locking him into cash. I'm not going to use that word just because he is so expensive. But and honestly, he's not really that expensive considering. I mean, he's got the first 4 games, touch counts are 16, 23, 14, and 19. Houston's rush defense has already allowed 5 rushing touchdowns and over 125 all-purpose yards from scrimmage. More importantly, Bijan is starting to separate himself from Tyler Algier after Algier had a strong start as well. So, I mean, I'm pretty much all in on Bijan Robinson. He's even tied for the team lead in targets with Drake London. So I don't really see a reason to fade him. Anything for you on Bijan?
I mean, if I was looking for an argument, it would be to do with his rostership, right? I've got him projected as the 4th most rostered running back, and it looks like that is waxing, right? That number has come up a fair amount over the last 2 days. So if he gets to the point where he's RB1 or 2, or even if the RB market upstream and we're looking at a 22-25% rostered Bijan, maybe I'll look to come in underweight. But practically speaking, everything for is here in this matchup, right? The Texans' run defense isn't the turnstile that they have been over the last couple of years, but they're still giving up plenty of fantasy points, thanks in large part to the amount of scoring that they give up, both as touchdowns and to receivers out of the backfield, which are things that Bijan Robinson does very well. So he's certainly in the player pool unless something just goes haywire on the rostership front.
Yep. So, I mean, we're high on Bijan. Anyone else in this top tier? The top tier is kind of empty. Do you like Derrick Henry? He's really kind of the only one else in this 7,000 range that we're looking at, unless Barkley plays. What do you think here?
I do to an extent. I agree with your overarching point that I like this game to really run the score up. And Henry is kind of moving in the opposite direction of Bijan Robinson. He's sitting at 7% projected rostership, and that is down from about 9.5 yesterday. So if he continues to wane, since we're going with moon references, then
Yes.
look, I'm happy to fire up a 5% rostered Derrick Henry at 7.5K, right? If no one will go there, I'll click the button. Obviously, he's losing some time on the field to Tajay Spears. His opportunity share is still plenty healthy, and obviously, any single time that he touches the ball, he can make a splash play. So if I'm getting that at very low ownership, that's something that I like to do in the tournament world.
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier, too, that their offensive line is finally getting healthy. They're getting some really, really key guys back this week. So I like the Titans to win this game outright and ride Henry in the 4th quarter as well. All right, so the mid-tier is a little bit bigger here from 5,600 to 7,000. And, I kind of want to move this along so we get to every position before we have to stop tonight. But I want to start with the Miami running game because, like I said, I made some enemies already with this one on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it now. I'm probably going to again on the radio later if they ask me. So here's what we're looking at right now with Devon Achan. I think, am I saying this right now? Is it
Chan.
changed? Achan, right? Okay, so until this recent news where Jahmyr Gibbs was now ruled doubtful and David Montgomery has moved to the highest rostered running back. All week it was Achan that was going to be the highest rostered running back. And the reasons obviously are clear for that. Where he's been, I mean, beyond a revelation over the last couple of weeks. I mean, what else can you ask from this guy who has in 2 games moved into the top 5 running backs in fantasy? So I get the sentiment, especially that the Giants defense has looked as bad as their offense. They look like they have no idea how to tackle from the eye test here. Achan also moved ahead of Mostert in both snaps and touches against the Bills last week. So at 6,100, all the arguments for him are there. And also the Giants have given up the 7th most fantasy points per game to running backs. So all the arguments to whether to play him are there. Here's my problem. He has, like I said, he's currently the 2nd highest projected owned running back. This is a guy who had 8 carries last week. And I understand that it was for 12.6 yards per carry, which is an unsustainable mark. The touchdown sustainability is not there too. So I don't really think that merits this high rostership for him. And then on the flip side, in GPP, that's an uncomfortable rostership projection for me. So I've found myself in a place where I'm not playing him at all. To a point where I'm not comfortable with him, his floor in cash, because they do have Mostert, and I'm not comfortable with his rostership in GPP because they have Mostert, and he is an easy pivot off of him. I mean, we're talking about Mostert was the RB2 in fantasy before last game. So I am going away from HN, and like I said, I'm in the minority on that. So where are you?
Man, you might be in the minority, but you're in good company. That is precisely the route that I am taking with Devon Achan this week, right? Like for me, in season long, like you just have to put him in your roster and take the good with the bad because he's going to get like 8 to 12 touches every week, and some of those will explode, and some of those he'll get you like 4.5 points. But with DFS, we have the benefit of seeing rostership and seeing where those markets go. And for me, I'm probably just going to just completely inverse the chart on his rostership in terms of my exposure to him over the course of the season. So if he's going to be, the first or 10th most popular running back, either way, he'll be north of 20%, and he's going to get, approximately, 40%, maybe 50% of the workload in total. He's a clear fade again, especially when the guy who's getting, arguably, or at least a comparable amount of work and is very explosive in his own right, Raheem Mostert, is projected at 3%. Like, why would you not pivot to that in a tournament context, right? So you laid out the argument beautifully. I'm really just trying to find some superlatives to bolster it up.
Well, I'm glad. I'm glad to hear that too, because it seems to me like that's the way to play this thing. And I think I liked the reference you made to season long too. I think the thing with him is that we're blurring those lines a little bit with season long and DFS. I mean, I 100% agree with you. You're not sitting him in season long at all. You shouldn't have done that last week. So I mean, yeah, set him in your lineup. Forget about it. But DFS is not season long. It's price. You're trying to get the maximum out of the price tag here. And I just think his floor is lower than what his ceiling, the high that his ceiling should be to play in cash. And then the rostership is just uncomfortable for Mostert, who arguably has an equal ceiling. and floor.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we're together on that one. So that's the Miami one. Like I said, I'll probably blow their mind later with that later if they ask me about it, but we'll see. But I can now say that you agree with me. So let's talk about other running backs in the mid tier here. David Montgomery, with all the news coming out of the injuries, with Amon-Ra St. Brown likely to sit and Jahmyr Gibbs now likely to sit, Montgomery's has 72 touches in 3 games. He's as we said, he's the trusted one in pass protection. He's the trusted one in the red zone, even when Gibbs is there. Now, if Gibbs is out, we can maybe count on more involvement in the passing game. At 6,600, he's a cash lock for me on DraftKings, but I'm curious to where you stand on him as a more of a GPP player at what's looking like it's not only going to be the highest rostered running back, but also going to surge ahead of the field.
Yeah, for me, that has me wanting to come in underweight, right? Like there's just there are so many outs that could bust your tournament builds if you're rostering a guy that's 25-30% owned, right? So I'll sprinkle him in here and there. He's a fine play on merit, but I think that you can get comparable upside in other places and not have to eat so much chalk with it, right? So I'll probably be at about half of his projected rostership in terms of my exposure.
Yeah. GPP is a little tougher for him, especially with the rapidly gaining rostership. So, but going back to Miami real quick too, because J.K. Mills, who asked the Zach Wilson question, we're getting some DFS questions in chat this week, which is nice and refreshing. He's got a good one actually. If you're kind of building an onslaught in Miami, in your lineups, would you play both Miami running backs? And I think you definitely can. I mean, we saw, and then he added coming back with Miami's defense. Yeah, I think that's the play for sure. If you don't want to pivot to the passing game or do a shootout, I think that's absolutely viable. We saw them play Denver. That obviously they can both have ceiling games together. So, I mean, do you have anything negative about that? I think it's perfectly fine to do that.
No, I'm kind of chuckling to myself because usually we talk about overload stacking as a way to get different when you're rostering chalky players, and that's almost exclusively a passing game context, right? But yeah, the concept still applies here, right? If you did this a few weeks ago against Denver, it would have worked beautifully. For me, if I'm rostering Mostert, it's largely because I want to pivot off of Achane, but putting them together is going to be a unique composition. So you get some of the benefits without leaving some of the upside behind.
Yeah, and obviously the Miami defense thing should apply there too, because if it's a Miami onslaught and they're just running, that means the Giants are dropping back every time in the second half, and that creates those sacks and turnovers that we saw against Seattle last week. So yeah, I like it for sure. All right, thank you for that. Let's keep it going here. Give me a couple more names in the mid tier before we move on to the kind of sub 5,500 range for running backs.
Yeah, there's a lot of popular options here in the mid tier. For me, I'm probably just going to be watching the rostership and letting that inform where I go over and underweight. Kyren Williams is maybe my favorite play of this lot because he's going to be the least popular option, or at least common way to get into this Philly and Rams game. But I mean, Joe Mixon is seeing a ton of rostership, rightfully so. Alvin Kamara, off of his 25 target game where Carr didn't want to throw the ball past the line of scrimmage, obviously going to be very popular, especially on DraftKings. We've talked about Mostert and Achane. DeAndre Swift, he's the guy that I'm pivoting off of with Kyren Williams, but is very much so a viable option in his own right. And then Isaiah Pacheco, it's an interesting way to save some money. He shouldn't be 5.7K given his workload, right? He's coming off of 42 snaps, 20 rushing attempts. He still runs a fair amount of routes, right? Basically all the things that you're looking for against a wet napkin of a Vikings defense. So he's probably going to be popular if he stays kind of in that 10 to 20% range. I'll have a fair amount of him, but one to watch for sure. There's a lot of guys that are a little bit underpriced and have a stranglehold on the volume in their backfield in this mid tier. So I'm going to have them in the pool, and I'm going to rotate my exposures around them.
Yeah, no, I love it. And Mixon, I just kind of point out the matchup against Arizona is really beneficial, and Arizona Cincinnati is in must-win mode with this one right now. So with T. Higgins out, I imagine he's a little bit more featured in the air as well as on the ground. And they've given up some big games to running backs already. So I love the Mixon call, and like you said, he's going to be popular. So moving into that low tier. I'm really not anywhere down here except for Breece Hall. If 5,400 just seems like a gift, even for somebody who has had such a volatile touch count so far in the year. If we're to trust coach speak that the training wheels are off and they're going to feature him, and I think there's got to be some merit to that, just because Dalvin Cook looks like he's done. 2.5 yards per touch. He looks like he has nothing left. And Michael Carter is nothing more than a passing down specialist. So I can really see them doing what they're saying and featuring Breece Hall in this one. And again, this is that Denver defense that we've attacked, all season, and rightfully so. I mean, they've given up by far the most fantasy points per game to running backs. I know, the poor guy. So at 5,400, I mean, I think Breece Hall is in play in all formats here. Anyone else in this lower range that you're liking?
Yeah, I like Hall, right? He's going to be kind of popular, but still a reasonable amount, kind of like that 10 to 15% range. You can certainly work with that. For me, one of my favorite plays on the slate is here in this low range, and that's Dameon Pierce, 5.3K. Look, the drumbeat that I've been banging for CJ Stroud for the last 4 weeks has been he's been doing this with, in most games, 3 or 4 of his starting offensive linemen out. Now this week, Shaq Mason back to a full practice, Laramie Tunsil back to a full practice, Titus Howard back to full practice, seeming like we're going to get a lot of these pieces back. These guys are, different quality offensive linemen in their own right, but if nothing else, these are all starters that are now going to be back in front of Dameon Pierce. And this is Dameon Pierce in a matchup against Atlanta that has offered the second highest fantasy production to opposing running backs this year, right? So for me, Pierce, while he's splitting snaps pretty evenly with Devin Singletary, his opportunity share is still plenty high, right? He's pushing 65-70% on the season, which is very good by 2023 standards. He's in a favorable matchup. By my account, I'm seeing him projected at 4% rostership. So I'm going to be clicking this button a lot, because I think that this Texans passing game is actually in for kind of a long day in the office, and the running game should really be what is going to keep them or help them keep pace. And if Pierce is going to be overlooked in that circumstance, like, give me as much as I can handle.
Yeah, and I like that call, because I'm kind of with you here. I think this is the first down game we're going to see from CJ Stroud. This doesn't really set up well for that passing game. Just the way Atlanta is set up as a defense. It's not that they're a world-beating pass defense. It's more just the kind of expected game script of the game, I guess you would call it. It's got the third lowest total. The Falcons are giving up, just the way they play defense, the sixth fewest yards per pass attempt. They're set up to kind of stop the big play. So I like that. I like that for Pierce too. That's a really good call. I'll probably be working him into some lineups on your say so there. So thank you for that, Eric. All right. So that is the running back position. We got a couple of questions in the chat. Let's get to that before we move on to the wide receiver position. So from Richard Hernandez, we've got full PPR, can only keep 3 running backs. I need to drop one now that Taylor is back. Who do I drop? Cook, Montgomery, Swift, or Jonathan Taylor himself? Oh my God. What? Well, you're not dropping Taylor. You're not dropping Montgomery. So, I mean, it really comes down to Cook versus Swift. What do you think there?
Can can I cross my fingers and hope that he's talking about Dalvin Cook and it's a very easy answer?
No, it's
Um,
James, and it's not an easy answer. Sorry, I should have said that. Yeah, that would have been an easy one.
yeah. Um, oh man. I mean, I guess it would be DeAndre Swift. I would be
Yeah, that's my
going
answer
through.
too.
I would be jumping through as many hoops as possible, trying to figure out a different way to assemble my roster to where I don't have to drop any of these guys. Um, I don't know if we're talking about roster limitations here or what, but these four guys flatly are not cut candidates in terms of rest of season
No.
value, right? And I have to think that there's someone hiding on your roster that you can let go of before these four.
Yeah, I mean these are all top 15 potential rest of season running
Yeah.
backs. So yeah, I'm with you. If it has to be one of them, it's Swift, but please try to cut somebody else. All right,
Yeah.
so thank you for that. From Jacob Dameron, Goff or Stroud this week. That would have been easier for me with the Detroit's passing game intact. I'm still going to take Goff here for reasons that we gave before, and the fact that he's just so much better at home. And the matchup against Carolina is soft. Are you on Goff over Stroud too?
I am. I've got him 2 spots ahead. We'll talk about it more when we get into the wide receivers, but I think
Mm.
we're looking at much more of a plotting pace, kind of near the line of scrimmage passing attack for Houston this week. So that's going to limit Stroud's upside.
Yeah, I've got him 3 spots ahead too, so we're kind of the same there. And then the last one here before we get to the receivers, Adrian Perez. Greetings from Mexico. All right, football
Hey,
diehards has
so
gone international. I love it. My first QB is Burrow, and my second QB is Stroud. Oh God, we got the Stroud questions coming out of the woodwork here. I play with Burrow. Oh wait, my first QB is Burrow, and my second QB is Stroud. I play with Burrow or select Dobbs from free agency. Uh, okay. Oh, I see. Okay. What do you think? So pick a quarterback of that, Eric. Is it Burrow?
it's Burrow for me.
Yeah.
Reporting is that he got out of that game without any setbacks. The volume's obviously there. If he's incrementally healthier this week, this is the matchup for him to get back to a good place.
Yeah, yeah, I would have tend to agree with that too. And then he's got a two-part question. Um, this says my first running back is Bijan and my second is HN. I'm not quite sure what that question's asking. I'm sorry. If you could maybe rephrase that, we can get back to that one for sure. But we'll try and help you out as best as we can. All right. Thank you for all the questions. Keep them coming. We're going to get to the wide receivers because we got about 20 minutes left here. We want to get through all the positions that we can. So let's get into the top tier here. So this is super fun. I'm in a I'm in a place right now where I think in cash you have to roster one of Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, or Jamar Chase. Chase obviously comes in as the big discount. I still, even with Higgins out, don't think that he has the ceiling of the aforementioned two, and I'm okay with spending up if you want one of those over him. Where are you landing on these three guys?
Yeah, I mean these guys are also three of the most popular wide receivers on the slate. For me, I think Tyreek Hill's probably the preferred option. I like his chances to finish as the wide receiver one the most this week, right? But he's also looking to be pretty popular, right? So if he starts to creep up north of like 25%, maybe I'll look to fade. But in a vacuum, I think the ceiling potential for Hill is arguably the highest. And 9K is obviously a lot to pay. I would thought that number, him crossing over that threshold, would actually draw his rostership down. But of the three, he would be my preferred option.
So on that, I'm going to piggyback off that. Is it fair to say that Hill has the lowest floor of the three? I would say he does if you had to have me pick from those three.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable, right? There are just so many ways that this Miami offense can hurt you, and so many game
Yeah.
scripts where they're not trying to, or they're not needing to, I should say, move the ball through the air, right? So you're really looking for productivity in the early parts of this game if it plays out as most of us presume it will. But in a quarter or 2 quarters of action, you can certainly get that position leading scoring. So maybe we're unveiling our true colors here, because as more of the tournament player, I'm really zeroing in on the upside, which I think is most evident with Hill.
In tournaments, Hill is for sure going to be the top one I have in that sense.
Mm.
And I'm imagining yes, and I'm imagining Noah Fant running 51 yards where nobody could tackle him, and then wondering what Tyreek Hill will do to that. So yeah, I think he could take anyone to the house that he touches multiple times in that game. So for sure in tournaments. I do want to mention up in this top tier as well, AJ Brown, who is second in the NFL in air yards and has double-digit targets in, I think, 3 straight games right now. I wrote this down somewhere, but I can't find it. No, not 3 straight, but 3 out of the 4. And also, Fantasy Stats is a great site where they do the first read rate, which is a really good stat for quarterback receiver connections. And it kind of showed me that I was underrating Deebo Samuel a little bit too much in the preseason. And basically what it is the rate at who the quarterback looks first in a certain offense. And AJ Brown is leading the NFL in first read rate. So thank you, Fantasy Stats, for that. Does he match these guys? He's nowhere near the rostership of the 3 guys we talked about. I like him in GPPs for sure.
Yeah, he's got some appeal in GPP because he clearly has that upside, but he's being largely overlooked. For me, part of the early season revelation for the Rams has been their prowess slowing down opposing pass catchers. And based on where he aligns, he's going to see the vast majority of his snaps covered by Killer Witherspoon and Darian Kendrick. These are guys that each have a catch rate that's below 40%, right? So I think he's probably in for a tough day in the office in terms of his matchup. Obviously, with these elite players, like one catch that's not in their coverage, or even a misstep, a slip, a broken tackle can make an entire day for AJ Brown. But looking at his matchup, like I've got cause for concern for how this week plays out for him.
Yeah, and I would say I wouldn't play him in cash at all. Especially not with these guys around him. I like it if you're stacking this game. This game has we mentioned it earlier with the quarterbacks. This game has a 50-point total, so we could see eruptions from all over. All right, so moving on to the middle tier here. This is, you as the GPP player are going to probably have a lot more to say in this tier than I am, but as far as cash goes, the only one that I'm really looking at kind of in any sense in kind of the 5,500 to 7,000 range is DeAndre Hopkins. I've already talked about how I'm into this Tennessee Indianapolis game as a whole. The Colts are absolutely getting destroyed this year so far by perimeter wide receivers. I know that, teams like, I'm just looking to see who they face, like Calvin Ridley and Puka Nacua and Nico Collins are a lot more exciting now than Hopkins is, who's looking like he's old. But, I think with Treylon Burks out in a game that I like, I think at 5,700, he's a solid cash floor play, but if he doesn't have the GPP ceiling. What do you think about some tournament plays in this realm?
Yeah, there are a couple, honestly. Actually, if I can double back to the top tier for a second, anytime Cooper Kupp is less than 5%, he's going to be interesting to me. In terms of a tournament context, Jalen Waddle is a fantastic pivot off of Tyreek Hill. But then here in the middle tier, DeAndre Hopkins, he has that super safe floor that you're looking for in cash. Michael Pittman was the stacking partner that I alluded to earlier when we were talking about Anthony Richardson. He is going to see a ton of Fulton this week. Fulton's allowing a 77% catch rate. He's allowing 2.1 yards per route covered, which is just insane. He's near the bottom in PFF's ranking at the position. Basically, the guy that's lining up against Fulton every single week is generally doing all of their damage in his coverage, and they are close to their ceiling. So Michael Pittman, coming in that kind of 5 to 8% rostership, reasonably priced at 6.4K. Like a lot of things about that, and I also like the circumstance for Chris Olave overall. He's a little bit pricey considering what we saw Derek Carr do last week, where he couldn't really move the ball down the field at all. Mm-hmm. I'm hoping that another week removed from that, actually getting back to practice this week will kind of allow him to push the ball a bit more. This is a Patriots that lost their star rookie in Gonzalez. They had to bring in J.C. Jackson via trade, who was already getting torched in limited action for the Chargers. And we're going to see more Miles Bryant on Olave, who basically only gives up deep plays, right? So if Carr can get him the ball, I think Olave has some potential to really pop off in this tier as well.
Yeah, I hope you're right for my Scott Fishbowl's team, who took a loss last week because Olave's almost non-existent score there. All right, so moving into that lower tier, I like Marquise Brown a good amount here at 5,000. He is kind of surprising. I don't know about surprisingly, but as surprising as Joshua Dobbs has been, he's taken Marquise Brown with him right now. Brown is pretty much leading the Cardinals in every relevant receiving stat, but he's also 7th in the NFL in air yards, which is his thing. In this game, I definitely think at 5,000, he is a solid cash play and a good bring back if you're stacking Bengals. For the rest of the stuff in cash for me, you got to go way down to the bottom of this thing. The obvious one here is Wan'Dale Robinson, who is minimum price. And I see J.K. Mills has a question about him we'll get to in a second, too. We might answer this during our talk here. But Wan'Dale is minimum price 3,000, which is a gift because the Giants played Monday night, so DraftKings didn't have a chance to price him up. He's a very low average depth of target guy, but in a PPR format at 3,000, you only need him to do like the 5 for 45 or whatever he was last week. Against Seattle. And then if you want to go up a little bit more, maybe get a little more ceiling, Khalif Raymond at 3,300 with all the injuries to the Detroit passing game. He should start out wide. That just depends what they do with Jamison Williams, but I think he's fine in cash as well. What are you looking at as far as tournament plays here?
Yeah, there's a lot to like in this tier. Look, obviously, Wan'Dale Robinson is kind of the free square. I don't like eating that much chalk, but I mean, right now I see him at 19%, which you can certainly work around, right? The other guys for the other pass catchers, I should say, for New Orleans, both Michael Thomas and Rashid Shaheed should be in play. This Patriots secondary is going to be in for some tough weeks, starting as soon as week number 5. I really like Tank Dell this week. Nico Collins has a nightmare of a matchup. This entire outside cornerback defense for the Falcons is really, really good, especially since they got Jeff Okudah back. We saw A.J. Terrell actually shift to a full-on shadow of Calvin Ridley last week. Kind of like I was talking about with A.J. Brown, Ridley found the end zone, so these top skill guys can certainly get it done on any given play. But, apart from that one catch, really kind of took him out of the game, and he figures to be on Nico Collins for the majority of this game. So I think we're going to see a lot of the Texans offense move to the slot and over the center of the field. The Falcons are actually allowing better than 2.5 times the amount of fantasy production to wide receivers lining up in the slot than those that are lining up out wide this year. So Tank Dell is being overlooked. 4.8K is super reasonable. Josh Reynolds, if he ends up playing, which he got in a full practice, I would like him at 4.2K. Michael Wilson, he's been a revelation over the last few weeks. He's too cheap at 3.7 in a game where they could be trailing. Maybe the dirty play that I mentioned earlier is Quez Watkins at 3.5K. He should be back this week, and he should resume the role of the slot receiver for the Philadelphia Eagles. I talked about it a little bit with A.J. Brown, but that leaves him avoiding that those difficult matchups on the outside, kind of like with the Falcons. He'll see a ton of Kobe Durant, which is easily the most favorable matchup. So, he'll be 1%, maybe sub 1% rostered in a very
Oh yeah.
popular game. So I'll probably have a couple of builds around him. He's also reasonably priced, right? So in total, there's a lot of really interesting ways to get unique in terms of your exposure to a game, do some salary savings, right? Like I'm going to be splashing around in this low tier a lot tomorrow.
I like the Quez call. He's always a single game favorite for me in those DFS showdowns.
Yeah,
He's always that bottom
he'll
guy
be
that
out
helps
there.
you fill the expensive ones in, and he usually comes through in that sense too. But I like that too. We have a couple of questions in the chat before we move on to tight end. We got a little less than 10 minutes left, and they're good segue questions here. One is DFS on the cheap receivers we just talked about, and then we got a couple of tight end questions, which will lead us into our tight end talk. So from JK Mills again, we love these DFS questions. Thanks for coming in. Keep them coming.
Keep him coming.
Who do you like more in DFS, Wan'Dale Robinson or Rashee Rice? We didn't really mention Rashee Rice, but I mean, I wrote about him in my Fantasy Pros pricing exploitation article on Tuesday earlier in the week. We might have different answers for this one too, just because of the game formats that we play. For me, Wan'Dale is kind of the boring floor play that you plug into cash, and I certainly am fine with Rice in GPP. I mean, that guessing that Kansas City wide receiver room is not something you can accurately do outside of Kelsey, but Rice is out targeting the rest of them, but he's also playing under 50% of snaps. So, I mean, for GPP play in that game, I think that's a good one to lean into if you want to maybe double stack Mahomes and Kelsey with somebody. What do you think on that one?
I think that's the way to play it, right? Like I'm not averse to playing Wan'Dale in a tournament context. If you're trying to look for a pivot off of his popularity, Rashee Rice is a good way to do it, right? He is playing less than 50% of snaps, but he is coming on a bit, right? Over his last two games, he's at least seen his route participation go up a significant amount to the point where he might actually run more routes than Justin Watson this week. If he does, then he will be the lucky recipient of the Caleb Evans coverage that we've been attacking all year. So, even if he's going to be out there on a limited number of snaps, his primary coverage matchup is very beneficial. So he can do a lot with that limited role, and that's exactly what you're looking for in these kind of min-price pivot options.
Yep. All right. So we're in agreement there. Thank you for that DFS question. Let's get to these other couple ones before we talk DFS tight ends. And here are a couple of season-long tight end questions, and they're not easy. So the first one is from Josh. Higbee or Hunter Henry? That was easier when Kupp was out, but it's tougher now. What do you think on that one, Higbee or Henry?
I think I've actually got Higbee ahead still. Yeah, I've got Higbee one spot ahead, but they're both in that kind of unwashed middle class of the position.
Yeah, I would go with Higbee too, if nothing else, but for a better offense and a much better game environment there. I know Kupp is back, and that hurts Higbee, but I mean, that New Orleans game is not the greatest for fantasy upside, so I would go Higbee too. I have him 1, 2, 3 spots ahead of Henry, and then the other one is Musgrave or Ferguson, and I'm looking at my own rankings right now, and I have Musgrave 12, Hunter Henry 13, Ferguson 14. I am always of the mindset if it's tight end versus 49ers versus tight end versus not 49ers, you go with the guy not facing the 49ers. They have been death to tight ends for years now. This year is no different. They've clamped down on some pretty good ones. So I'm pretty easily Musgrave there. What about you?
I am Musgrave as well. Ferguson is off to a nice start, but he's doing more than he statistically should be based on his role in the offense. So, in addition to the bad matchup, I also think he's due for some regression.
Yes, I agree with that as well. So we're in agreement on Musgrave there. And then one last one. I need to start 2 running backs Saquon, Kyron Williams, or Kamara. So, well, I mean, we'll kind of rephrase this. If Saquon, I don't think he's going to play, but I hope he does. But I don't think he's gonna. So, I mean, that'd make it easy for you. If he does play, what do you think on that one? Who sits out of those three?
I'd probably end up sitting Kamara of those three. They're neck and neck. I've got them back to back, and then two more to get to Kamara, assuming that Saquon plays. I don't think he does for whatever it's worth, but for me, especially now, the strength of what's left of that Patriots defense is opposing the run. So I think that we'll see Derek Carr take it to the air a bit more, and if he's pushing the ball downfield, we lose a lot of that pass volume floor for Kamara. Whereas the Eagles defense is not last year's version of themselves against the run. Kyron gets insane volume, and the Dolphins, they're not shy about letting you get the ball moving against them on the ground as well, right? So if Saquon's out there, I do think that he can produce.
Yeah, I would agree. And Kyron is, there's no way you don't sit him. He's not for me, he's not a question to consider sitting at all. He's a set and forget, even in the tougher matchups, just based on the volume. And he's getting more and more efficient, even as the season goes along, too. So thank you for that question. All right, so we got maybe 5-6 minutes here to get through the tight end positions. Luckily, it's a much smaller player pool than the other ones. So let's start at the top. I mean, is there anything negative to say about Travis Kelce?
His girlfriend is annoying a bunch of
I knew it was coming.
players.
As I said it, I could sense it coming. By the way, did you notice? I don't know if you play on FanDuel, but his price on FanDuel is $8,789, which is a mashup of his number and her album.
Yeah.
So,
I did see on Prize Picks he had like little lipstick marks all over his face. So everyone's leaning in, and that includes in DFS. He's gonna be the most popular tight end. 15% isn't unreasonable, right? We're used to seeing him push kind of upper 20s. He's kind of been in a bit of a lull. So if you can get him at low rostership by his standards, don't mind it at all. Also, like pivoting directly off of him here in the top tier to TJ Hawkinson is going to be about 1/3 of the ownership at 6%. He's also not playing up to his standards. So, chasing either of these elite options that are going to be a little bit overlooked is something that I'm keen on.
Yeah, and I tried to kind of figure out a couple of years ago if Kelce was getting old, and it turned out that he was not. But he's 34 now. One. I mean, he's not going forever here. And if you look, if you want to really dig deep, I mean, he's over his last 5 games, dating back to last year's games. He's averaged 68 yards in those 5 games, which is that's un-Kelce-like. So I'm not saying, he's worth every penny. If you want to pay up for him at tight end, go for it. But I do like the Hawkinson, maybe a little more of an exciting ceiling in that game as a pivot in that range, and he'll get nobody because that's going to be that, if I'm in this range, I might as well pay the extra $1,000 for Kelce. So that's always an important thing in DFS as well. Moving into the mid-tier, since the news of the Detroit passing game, Sam Laporta has surged to the head of the line as the highest rostered tight end in this range, and the highest rostered one on FanDuel, period, because his price is so cheap there. He's in play even at 5,000.
Yeah, very very much so, right? If his rostership just explodes, right? If it doubles between right now and kickoff, maybe I'll look to fade off of him. But he's done everything you could ask for him and more out of a rookie tight end. Obviously, he's in a premier spot given how shorthanded this passing offense is. So a lot of credence to Sam Laporta. I find myself liking this mid tier a lot. Either for stacking options, right? I like Lamar. I obviously like Hurts. We talked about Stafford earlier. Getting to Andrews or Goddard or Higbee as a stacking partner is certainly viable. Mark Andrews at 5,500 is just weird. Like that's way too low for his talent. And with Goddard and Higbee specifically, these are going to be two of the lower owned routes to get into this game, right? So that'd be kind of the context by which I'm rostering them. But I find myself in the mid tier for the tight ends this week, which I don't find myself all that often, honestly.
Yep, I almost never do because that's not really a plus EV cash play. It's either all the way up or all the way down. So talking all the way down, there's several cash plays you can dabble with down here. Zach Ertz is going to get a lot of rostership. Just he's only 2 targets behind Marquise Brown in the Arizona offense. He's very boring targets, but kind of like the Wan'Dale Robinson talk from before, he'll get you what you need from 3,500, especially in that game. I'm going with Jonnu Smith as my cash tight end this week, and didn't think I was ever going to say that again. But we have to accept at this point that he is the tight end in Atlanta's offense, not Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts' finesse receiver does not fit their style of play at all. Jonnu Smith is a blocker, and it's kind of notable now that he's the one that fits their style of play, and now he's producing because of it too. He's got 20 targets the last 3 weeks, whereas I'm looking it up, trying to not stutter as I talk. Kyle Pitts has, because I thought I had this, 18, and he has done less with those 18. So as of right now, Pitts is still showing more rostership than Jonnu Smith. I don't care. I'm playing the $400 cheaper one, and he's like I said, he's the one you want. And 2,900, he doesn't have to do half of what he did last week. So that's the cash tight end for me. Real quick, last couple of minutes, where are you in this low range?
Yeah, I mean, look, you're really punting at this point. Jonnu Smith is certainly the safest of the lot at sub 3K, right? He doesn't have to do anything, like you said. Zach Ertz is getting a lot of volume. Irv Smith is kind of interesting. Just that this Bengals side is going to be without T. Higgins, 3.1K. He's coming back from injury, so those players generally go overlooked. I mean, it's a punt, right? But he'll be on the field. The Cardinals are allowing almost 11 yards per reception to the tight end, so he gets a couple of looks. He can maybe get a little bit closer to a ceiling, maybe fall into the end zone. But really you're looking for guys to catch a handful of balls and hopefully make their way into the box. And there's some guys that have the volume to do it out of this list.
Yep, and I agree, and that's the tight end position. So before we sign off, we got one more DFS question from J.K. Mills, and it's a defense, which is a nice little bow on our show here. And he just says, what defense do you guys like this week out of Miami, Detroit, and the Jets? And he's saying in the DFS context. So, I mean, pricing does have to come into account with that, but it's Miami, right, for me.
Yeah, I mean, Miami projects the best, right? I generally like to splash around with the lowest price options and try to find a turnover. For me, the Jets look kind of interesting there, right? 3.1K. They certainly have the playmakers to get after Russell Wilson and maybe turn an interception or a fumble into a touchdown. So while the team overall isn't playing up to the standards that they're faithful would like, this defense is still very, very strong, even without Reed this week.
Yep, yeah, I agree with that too. Miami will definitely, if it, depending on what contest you're talking about there, JK, Miami will definitely be the highest rostered out of those three too. So if you want to get away from that, consider the other two are all fine. All right, so that is going to do it for our DFS show. I hope we have satisfied all of your DFS needs. Eric we'll talk about it. We're going to be looking. I'm going to be away next weekend. But we'll look, Eric and I'll discuss maybe keeping this show going for you in week 6. So you can attack that slate as well. You can find all my work on Football Diehards and Fantasy Pros right now. And I am about to jump off of here after we sign off and go right on SiriusXM Fantasy and SiriusXM NFL on the Football Diehard Show with Bob Harris and Mike Dempsey and talk more DFS. Eric, where can they find your stuff?
All my stuff rolls up into my Twitter/X handle, which is right under my name at FantasyNav. And I'll be tuning right to XM87 to hear you heat some people up with your H-hand takes. So I can't wait.
Well, you're going to get name dropped. I'm telling you that right now because you agree with me. I need a buddy on this one.
Yeah, we're in this together, Jamie.
They got to ask me about it though. Maybe we've said it enough that we baited them that they'll know. All right. Thank you again, everybody. Tune in again live, hopefully next week, to see Eric break down the week 6, and the both of us will be back with you in week 7 for that slate when the buys start to be in full effect. For Eric, I'm Jamie signing off for this